The courthouse of Dry Ridge wasn't much more than an old timber room hammered together back in the days when gold fever still pushed men to gamble their souls. The floorboards creaked under every boot. The air smelled faintly of dust, sweat, and sun-baked pine. And the walls carried the weight of 100 grudges that had passed through this place long before justice ever tried to. By noon, the benches were packed, ranch hands still in work clothes, merchants smelling of tobacco and leather oil, miners with grit on their collars, and a few strangers who had ridden in just to see a spectacle. And today was a spectacle. Two deputies shoved Asha into the room, their hands rough on her arms. She stumbled only once, but that slight falter was enough to send whispers rippling through the crowd. She looked painfully out of place among the scowling faces and polished revolvers. A young Apache woman, slender and sun-touched, her long black hair braided with a single raven feather. The beads woven into it chipped from travel. Dirt smudged her cheek, but her dark eyes stayed sharp, tired, wary, but unbroken. The gaze of someone who had walked through storms far worse than this one. The charge announced against her felt too big for the small room to hold. The theft of mineral extraction designs belonging to the Western Iron Company. Asha didn't move, didn't flinch. Her chin stayed lifted the entire time, proud in that quiet, steady Apache way. The kind that angered the men who built fortunes on other people's land. Everyone in Dry Ridge knew the real story, even if no one dared speak it aloud. Western Iron had been eyeing the lands of Asha's people for months. Lands rumored to hold rich veins of a unique ore hidden in the red ridges north of the valley. When the tribe refused to sell, a mysterious crime suddenly appeared, and the only witness conveniently vanished. The perfect trap, the perfect victim. The seat beside Asha, the one meant for her lawyer, was empty, had been empty all morning. The attorney hired from town had simply disappeared before sunrise, leaving nothing behind but a paid bill and a coward's silence. The old judge, half blind and wholly exhausted with Western Iron's meddling, rubbed his temples. "Miss Asha," he said, voice gravel rough, "without counsel present, the court has little choice but to proceed." The crowd leaned forward, hungry for the ending. Asha merely tightened her jaw. She knew what came next. They all did. The judge lifted his gavel. Given the absence of defense representation, charges, a voice cut him off. Low, steady, carrying the weight of dust roads and long winters. "I will protect her." Every head turned as if yanked by the same rope. At the back of the room, pushing through the doorway with slow, unhurried steps, stood Elliot Warren. He wasn't dressed for court. He wasn't even dressed for town. The man looked carved from the same earth he worked. Tall, broad-shouldered, weather-bitten, his duster coat streaked with gray dust from miles of open land. A faint scar cut across his jaw, and his eyes, sharp, tired, and battle-worn, carried a heaviness that made even the deputies shift uneasily. His boots were dusty, his hat old, his posture straight as a rifle barrel. Everyone knew him, everyone remembered. Once Elliot had been the moral backbone of Dry Ridge, the man who stood between greed and the innocent, until the mining companies crushed him, took his position, slandered his name, and left him a widower raising a daughter on a struggling ranch. Since then, he kept to his own land, speaking only when necessary, fighting no one's battles but his own. So when he stepped forward now, murmurs rippled through the benches like wind through prairie grass. The judge blinked. "Mr. Warren, you are not an attorney." "No," Elliot said, voice low but unwavering. "But I know the law, and I know when someone's being railroaded." Asha stared at him, confused, almost distrustful. She had never met this man, never spoken to him. Yet he stood between her and the machine about to swallow her whole. The courtroom buzzed louder. Why her? Why now? Why would a grieving rancher risk everything for a girl from a tribe most townsfolk barely tolerated? But Elliot didn't back down, didn't explain himself. He stepped beside Asha, the empty chair no longer empty, and placed one hand firmly on the table, staking his claim the way ranchers did when they'd had enough. "I will protect her," he repeated, calmer this time, as if it wasn't a declaration but a promise rising from somewhere deep, old, and unshakable inside him. It rang through the wooden room like a hammer on an anvil, and in that moment, even the dust in the air seemed to pause. No one yet understood why Elliot Warren, loner, widower, rancher, would stand up for a young Apache woman accused of something that could get them both killed. But for the first time since she was dragged into this town, Asha felt the faintest shift in the air. A change. A chance. Elliot Warren had spoken. And once that man spoke, he did not turn back. Long before Elliot Warren walked into that courthouse and declared he would protect a frightened Apache girl, he had once stood in very different rooms. Rooms where people listened when he spoke, where justice bent toward truth, not money. 15 years ago, Elliot was the kind of man folks believed in without hesitation. As head of the Frontier Legal Counsel, he carried a reputation carved from honesty, grit, and uncompromising fairness. Ranchers trusted him, merchants trusted him. Even the roughest drifters kept their hats in hand when he passed by. Back then, his shoulders were straighter, his eyes clearer, and the world hadn't yet taught him how brutally it could break a man. Dry Ridge was smaller then, but the problems were already big. Water was the heart of every ranch and homestead, and the creek running from the northern ridge was the lifeline of the entire valley. When cattle got sick, when fish floated belly up in the shallows, Elliot was the first to ride out and investigate. What he found made his blood run cold. Barrels of chemical sludge buried upstream, oily residue staining the mud, the unmistakable stench of industrial waste. Western Iron Company had moved fast and quiet, carving their ambitions into the land without a whisper of permission. Elliot did what any honest man of the frontier would do. He gathered evidence, interviewed townsfolk, and prepared to bring the truth before the territory marshals. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't have imagined, was how far Western Iron would go to silence him. They struck first. Accusations appeared out of nowhere, slick and poisonous. Documents Elliot had never seen were suddenly found in his office. Witnesses he trusted claimed he had forged evidence to ruin the company. Men he had defended in the past turned their backs on him, their eyes clouded with fear and pressure. Even the council he once led folded under the weight of bribed judges and company men, whispering threats in back alleys. And just like that, the most trusted man in Dry Ridge became its greatest disgrace. He was stripped of his title without ceremony. The badge he had worn with pride was taken from his hand like it was a stolen coin. By the end of that month, Elliot couldn't walk through town without hearing muttered insults or seeing shutters slam shut as he passed. But the worst wound wasn't the lost reputation, it was what the scandal did to his family. His wife, Clara, gentle, steadfast, the light of the Warren Ranch, grew sick that same bitter winter. A lingering illness, slow and cruel. The town doctor tried what he could, but medicine cost money, and Elliot's name had become poison. Friends who once ate at his table now crossed the street to avoid him. Work dried up. Every dollar slipped through his fingers faster than he could earn it. When Clara died, Elliot stood beside her grave under a gray sky, feeling as though the earth had opened not only to take his wife, but to swallow the last good piece of him. After that, something inside him hardened. Quiet, cold, irreversible. He sold half his livestock to keep the ranch alive. Then he built walls, real ones around his land, and invisible ones around his heart. From then on, the world saw only a solitary rancher, weather-beaten, withdrawn, carrying grief like a permanent shadow. His daughter Mia was the only soul he let close, and even she learned to tread lightly around the raw ache that lived in her father's silence. Elliot wanted nothing more than a peaceful life, far from courtrooms and newspapers, and men who played God with other people's futures. He rose with the sun, worked the fields, fixed fences, and hunted coyotes that threatened his stock. It wasn't joy, but it was quiet, and quiet was enough. Until the day he saw Asha stand alone in that crowded courthouse, young, cornered, trembling beneath the weight of a sentence she did not deserve. Something old and buried, that instinct, fierce and stubborn to protect the innocent, rose from the ashes of the man he used to be. It struck him with the force of a desert storm. He hadn't planned to speak. He hadn't planned to get involved. But the moment he saw fear in that girl's eyes, fear he knew too well, his past surged forward, alive and unyielding. The words came out before he fully understood them. I will protect her. And with that single vow, the man Dry Ridge had tried to bury was dragged back into the fight he had once sworn to leave behind. Because some instincts, like justice, like honor, don't die, they wait. Silence settled over the courtroom the moment Elliot Warren stepped forward, the kind of silence that felt alive. tight, expectant, buzzing beneath the skin like the air before a thunderstorm. The judge lowered his gavel. The deputies exchanged glances. Folks in the benches leaned in, boots scraping on the floorboards. No one knew what Elliot intended to do next, but everyone knew better than to look away. Elliot moved toward the defense table with the slow, grounded certainty of a man who had spent most of his life on horseback. His long coat, a weather-cracked, sun-bleached duster, brushed against his boots as he walked. He wasn't wearing anything close to proper courtroom attire. No vest, no polished shoes, no tie, not even a clean shirt. Just a rough, earth-toned work shirt, rolled sleeves, and a stance that radiated the quiet authority of someone shaped by open land and hard years. When he reached the defense stand, he placed both hands on the table. His knuckles were scarred, his palms calloused. Yet when he finally spoke, his voice was surprisingly calm, low but carrying a steady, grounded weight that instantly commanded the room. "Your Honor," Elliot said, "if the court will allow it, I'd like to question the evidence." The judge hesitated, squinting down at him over the rim of his spectacles. "Mr. Warren, you are not licensed to practice law." "No," Elliot answered, "but I am licensed to see when something stinks." A ripple of laughter moved through the spectators, followed by a scolding glare from the judge. But even he couldn't hide the faint twitch of interest in his expression. "Proceed," he sighed. "For now." Elliot nodded once. Then he turned toward the sheriff's deputy holding the evidence box. "Let's start with that stolen design. Bring it here." The deputy looked uncertain. Western Iron's influence had made men nervous, but he obeyed. Elliot took the folded blueprint with 2 fingers, holding it up to the light streaming through the dusty courthouse windows. "This design," he said slowly, "was supposedly found in Miss Asha's belongings." "That's correct," the prosecutor replied, a lean man with 2 bright boots and a too slick smile. "Recovered from her saddlebag." Elliot's eyes narrowed just slightly. "Funny," he murmured. "Apache saddlebags don't look anything like this one. That's a store-bought canvas pouch from Granger's shop. Costs about $4. Brand new." He let the words hang in the air like drifting smoke. A girl walking across half the desert doesn't carry something this clean. A few ranchers nodded from the benches. The prosecutor cleared his throat. "Irrelevant." "No," Elliot said, voice steady. "It's the first thing that's relevant. Evidence shouldn't lie before the person holding it ever gets a chance to speak." He turned to the next sheet. Western Iron's claimed inventory logs. "These dates don't match," Elliot said. "You reported the design missing 2 days before Asha even passed through Dry Ridge." The prosecutor stammered. We received earlier reports." "From who?" Elliot asked sharply. "Every man who signed these depositions works for Western Iron Company. Same payroll, same overseer, same hand telling them what to say." The room stiffened. Several people shifted uncomfortably. Western Iron was known for its deep pockets and deeper shadows. Elliot continued, his voice cutting through the stale air like a clean, unforgiving blade. "Let's talk about witnesses." The first claimed he saw Asha sneaking around the mining yard. He paused, then added, "He also happens to be married to Western Iron's bookkeeper." The second witness hasn't set foot in Dry Ridge for 3 months. And the third? He's been drinking at every saloon from here to Silver Bend for weeks. I doubt he could tell the difference between a horse and a windmill right now. Soft laughter broke again, nervous but genuine. This was the Elliot Warren people remembered. The one who sifted truth from lies with that rugged, unwavering, sharp-eyed certainty that once made him the backbone of frontier justice. For the first time since being dragged into town, Asha lifted her eyes toward him. She watched this weathered cowboy, this stranger, stand between her and the world with a fierceness she had never expected from anyone outside her tribe. There was disbelief in her stare, yes, but beneath it, something fragile and flickering. Hope. The judge leaned back, studying Elliot with renewed scrutiny. "Mr. Warren, it has been a long while since this court has seen you question anything." Elliot's gaze stayed fixed on the prosecutor. "Maybe it's time someone started again." The quiet that followed wasn't confusion. It was recognition. Recognition of the man they had once feared, once trusted, the man they never thought they'd see rise again. And in that silence, Asha realized something she hadn't dared believe all morning. She was no longer alone. Night settled heavy over Warren Ranch, the kind of quiet, sprawling darkness only the frontier knew. vast, star-patched, and stretched thin across the open land like a worn wool blanket. The wind carried the faint scent of sagebrush and the distant howl of a lone coyote wandering along the ridgeline. Elliot led his horse toward the small canvas tent he had set up near the barn, far enough from the house to give the frightened girl space, close enough that he could keep watch. A single lantern glowed inside, soft, flickering, almost fragile against the blackness around it. Asha sat cross-legged on a woven blanket, her posture straight but guarded. The firelight painted her face in muted copper tones, sharpening the weary angles in her cheeks. She looked stronger than she had in court, but not by much. Fear clung to her like dust on a trail-worn saddle. Elliot paused outside the tent flap, clearing his throat gently instead of barging in. "You awake?" he asked. "Yes," she answered quietly. Her voice was tight, wary, as if every word cost effort. You can come." He stepped inside, setting his hat near the entrance. The lantern cast long shadows across the canvas walls, shadows that swayed like restless spirits. For a moment, neither spoke. Elliot wasn't a man blessed with easy words, and Asha had lived too long among people who used language like weapons. Finally, Elliot sat on an overturned crate, resting his forearms on his knees. "I need to understand what you're caught up in," he said softly. "If I'm to protect you, I need the truth, all of it." Asha's gaze flickered toward him, nervous, conflicted, raw. She rubbed her palms together slowly, as though warming them over a memory she didn't want to touch. "It started with land," she whispered. "Our land." Elliot nodded once, signaling her to continue. "The Western Iron Company came to our council 3 months ago," she said. "They brought maps, papers, promises. They wanted the Northern Ridge, our sacred ground, the land where our ancestors are buried, the land we guard." Her voice wavered just slightly. "We refused." Elliot felt a cold, familiar heaviness settle into his chest. Asha took a slow breath. "After that, things changed. White men began riding near our camps. Strangers, surveyors, armed ones. They claimed they were just prospecting, but we knew better." Her eyes hardened, the old Apache fire glowing beneath the exhaustion. "They realized something," she said. "Something dangerous." Elliot leaned forward, brows furrowing. "What did they realize?" "That beneath the ridge," Asha explained, "lies a mineral unlike any other. A rare ore that can burn hotter and last longer than coal. It glows faintly under moonlight. My grandmother taught me how to use it to craft firestones for winter shelters." Elliot's breath caught. A mineral like that could change everything. Fuel, railroads, weapons. Men would kill for it, had killed for less. "And you're the only one who knows how to refine it?" he asked. Asha nodded, her expression solemn, unguarded now that the truth had cracked open. "They tried to buy our land again. We refused again. That is when the accusations began. They said I stole their drawings, their designs. They sent writers to follow me. They bribed lawmen. They made the miners speak lies." Every sentence felt like a stone dropping into the quiet of the tent. "If they take the ridge," she whispered, "they take everything. Our burial grounds, our homes, our water. My people will scatter or die." A gust of wind slapped the canvas hard, as if the night itself recoiled from the weight of her words. Elliot felt something old inside him stir. Anger, but older than that. Recognition. Because he had seen this before. Because he had lived it. The same company, maybe not the same men, but the same greed, had once buried barrels of poison near Dry Ridge Creek and let his wife wither without the medicine she needed. They had taken his career, his reputation, and ground them down until nothing remained but dust and bitterness. Western Iron had destroyed him. Now they meant to destroy her people too. Asha's voice trembled. "I did not steal anything. I only tried to protect what is ours." Elliot looked at her. Not as a rancher, not as a man forced back into battles he thought he'd left behind, but as someone who understood the cost of standing alone. He exhaled slowly. "This is the same damn pattern," he murmured. "The same trap, different target." Asha met his eyes, uncertainty flickering through her expression. "Then, you believe me?" Elliot didn't hesitate. "I believe you," he said. His tone was steady, resolute. "And I won't let them do to you what they did to me." Outside, the prairie wind shifted, brushing across the ranch like a quiet omen. The fight Elliot Warren had sworn never to join again had already begun. The next morning broke cold and pale over Warren Ranch, the kind of morning where the sun rose slow and reluctant through a haze of dust carried down from the northern ridge. Elliot had barely slept. The truth Asha revealed the night before still gnawed at him. Sharp, bitter, familiar. He saddled a horse and rode out to check the fences, needing movement to settle his thoughts. Back at the ranch house, however, someone else was already wide awake. Mia Warren, all sharp eyes and restless energy, sat at the kitchen table with maps, ledgers, and a battered field journal spread out before her. The girl had her father's stubborn streak and her mother's quick mind. She wasn't one to sit quiet when trouble was near, and the arrival of an Apache girl framed for theft had lit a fire inside her that Elliot didn't yet know was burning. She tucked a loose strand of sun-streaked hair behind her ear and leaned over a map of the northern ridge. The ink was faded, the paper creased, but she traced the lines with the same focused concentration her father once used to dissect witness testimonies. Rare ore, glowing under moonlight, she murmured, recalling every word Asha had spoken. To most people, that sounded like superstition or tribal lore. To Mia, it sounded like a clue. She flipped open a ledger she'd taken from the trading post last night, one she had quietly borrowed after noticing Western Iron's supply wagons had doubled in number over the past month. The entries were messy, scrawled in a rush, but the pattern was unmistakable. Large shipments of blasting powder, surveying tools, reinforced rails, barrels marked hazardous, and all of them bound for the northern ridge. Mia's heartbeat quickened. "They aren't just looking," she whispered. "They're digging." A chill ran through her, not from fear, but from the cold, unsettling certainty that something enormous was taking shape beneath everyone's noses. She grabbed her coat, stuffed the ledger inside, and slipped outside just as the sun crested the horizon. The girl moved with a natural caution, her boots whispering over the frost-dusted earth. She headed toward the ridge trail, her breath forming pale clouds in the air. Her father would kill her if he knew she was snooping near Western Iron's territory. But Mia had inherited more than just Elliot's grit. She'd inherited his instinct for truth. 2 miles out, she crouched behind a cluster of juniper bushes. Below her, in a shallow valley, Western Iron wagons rattled along the dirt road, wheels biting deep into the dry earth. She counted them, 8 in total, each one carrying heavy crates covered in tarps. And then she saw them, armed riders, a full squad. Not miners, they moved with the discipline of hired guns. Her stomach tightened. This wasn't a business operation. This was a military action. She stayed hidden, letting the convoy pass before she slid down the hillside, boots kicking loose stones. She crept close to where the wagons had left deep tracks in the dirt. Kneeling, she brushed her fingers over the print. "Heading straight for the Apache Ridge," she muttered. "Asha's Ridge." The realization crashed through her like desert thunder. Western Iron wasn't planning on negotiation. They weren't even planning a quiet theft. They were preparing to take the land by force, wipe out the tribe's claim, seize the mineral deposits, and bury anyone who stood in their way. Asha wasn't charged to silence her. She was charged to remove her. Because she alone understood how the ore worked. She alone could teach others how to harness it. She alone knew the exact places where it could be found. That made her not a suspect, but a threat. Mia swallowed hard, her breath trembling with a mix of fear and determination. She darted back toward the ranch, her boots pounding the dirt, her mind racing faster than her lungs could catch up. By the time she reached the porch, Elliot had returned, dust on his coat and worry lined across his face. "Mia, where have you been?" he asked, voice stern but laced with a father's instinctive fear. "Finding the truth," she said, shoving the ledger into his hands. Elliot flipped through it, his brow furrowing deeper with every page. "They're not just after Asha," Mia said, breathless but unwavering. "They're going after the land, the ore, everything. They're preparing for something big, something dangerous." She met her father's eyes, her gaze sharp, urgent, resolute. "This isn't a theft charge, Papa. It's a war, a resource war. And Asha, she's the only one standing in their way." Elliot didn't reply. He didn't need to. Because in that moment, a moment heavy as thunder, the last pieces slid into place, and the truth hit him with brutal, unforgiving clarity. Western Iron wasn't just repeating the past. They were escalating it. And this time, the target wasn't just him. It was an entire people, and a girl who had trusted him. Midnight came to Warren Ranch not gently, but like a slow-moving storm, heavy, wind-bitten, thick with the kind of silence that makes a man check his rifle twice. The lantern on Elliot's porch flickered weakly, battling the cold gusts rolling off the ridge. Inside, Asha slept uneasily, and Mia pored over the documents she'd gathered earlier that day, her brows tight with worry. Elliot stood alone by the corral, his breath fogging in the cold air as he stared toward the dark horizon. Ever since Mia told him what she'd discovered, he'd felt the night pressing in on him. Dark, suffocating, like fate creeping closer, step by step. Then far off, the faint uneven rhythm of horse hooves. Not the steady beat of a rancher or drifter. No, this was frantic, panicked. Elliot stiffened. His hand dropped instinctively to the revolver at his hip. A rider burst into view, a lone woman slumped over a chestnut mare, her cloak snapping behind her like a torn banner. As she neared, the lantern light revealed a face he hadn't seen in years. Julia Fenwick. Once, she'd been the translator and assistant hired by traders dealing with the Apache. Bright-eyed, quick with numbers and languages. Now she looked nothing like that polished young woman. Her face was hollowed, haunted, smeared with dust and tears. Her hair hung in loose, wind-whipped strands. And her hands trembled as she pulled the horse to a stop. "Elliot," she rasped, voice frayed, brittle at the edges. I need to speak with you. Now." He didn't lower his guard. "Julia, what in hell are you doing out here?" She slid off the horse and nearly fell. Elliot caught her elbow, feeling how violently she shook. "It's Asha," she whispered. I came to help her. I can't keep living with this." Her voice broke on the last word. Mia, hearing the commotion, stepped onto the porch. Asha appeared moments later, wrapped in a blanket, her eyes wide with fear and suspicion. Julia looked at the young Apache woman and crumpled to her knees. "I'm sorry," she said, voice cracking into a raw confession. "I'm so damn sorry." Asha flinched, stepping back. Elliot crouched beside Julia, his voice low but firm. "Tell us the truth, all of it." Julia nodded shakily. When she finally spoke, her words spilled out fast, uneven, as if she'd been carrying them for years. "I stole the map," she said. "The sacred land map from Asha's tribe. I took it with my own hands." Asha inhaled sharply, her eyes burning with disbelief. "I sold it to Western Iron," Julia continued, tears streaking her dust-worn cheeks. "They threatened me, Elliot. Said they'd expose things from my past, things I thought were buried." She swallowed hard, shoulders shaking with guilt. "I didn't know what they'd do next. I didn't know they'd target Asha, frame her. I didn't know they'd turn this into a war." Elliot's voice went cold. "But you know now." Julia reached into her coat with trembling fingers and pulled out a weathered leather notebook. Its cover was branded with a simple iron emblem, the unmistakable mark of Vance, the director of Western Iron. "That," she whispered, holding it out with unsteady hands, "is everything." Elliot took the notebook carefully. The leather felt heavy, dangerously heavy, with secrets. He flipped it open. Inside were pages filled with detailed plans, sketched in a cold, calculating hand. Maps marking the exact land the company meant to seize. Lists of payments made to lawmen, including the sheriff. Instructions to spread false rumors among the townsfolk. Contracts for hired guns. And most damning of all, notes describing how evidence against Asha was manufactured. Mia covered her mouth, horrified. Asha stood frozen, hands balled into fists, shaking with silent fury. "This is their playbook," Elliot murmured, his jaw tightening as he turned the pages. "This is how they planned to take everything." Julia nodded weakly. "I kept a copy. I knew someday they'd come for me too. I couldn't run anymore. Not when an innocent girl is about to hang for it." The wind whipped around them, sharp and bitter, as if the whole prairie recoiled from the corruption written in that notebook. Elliot closed it with a firm, decisive snap. "This," he said, voice resolute, "is enough to tear their case apart. Enough to expose them." Julia looked up with eyes red and desperate. "Then use it. Please, do what I was too afraid to do." Asha stepped forward slowly. For a moment, any onlooker might have thought she would lash out. But instead, she knelt beside Julia and placed a trembling hand over hers, a gesture both fragile and powerful. "Fear makes prisoners of all of us," Asha whispered, "but truth can free you." Julia broke into sobs. Elliot rose, gripping the notebook tightly, his expression carved from pure determination. At last, he had the weapon he needed. The proof Western Iron could never outrun. The key to unraveling every lie. The night had delivered a betrayer. But it had also delivered the one thing they needed most, a chance to fight back. Julia had barely disappeared into the darkness when the ranch fell silent. Too silent. Even the crickets seemed to sense the danger crawling across the night. Elliot stood on the porch, one hand gripping the ledger of Vance's secrets, the other resting near his holstered revolver. The wind had changed, colder now, carrying the taste of dust and something bitter. Then he heard it. Horses, many of them, pounding toward the ranch with a rapid, thunderous rhythm. "Get inside," Elliot hissed, shoving Asha and Mia toward the door. But it was already too late. From the shadows beyond the barn, a line of riders emerged. A dozen masked gunmen, faces covered with black cloth, rifles slung across their backs. Their silhouettes looked jagged under the moonlight, cruel and unwavering. Winchester barrels glinted like hungry teeth. They spread out quickly, surrounding the ranch in a tightening ring. Western Iron had come, not for negotiation, not for intimidation, but to wipe them out. One rider raised a fist, signaling the others. "Down," Elliot shouted. A volley of gunfire cracked through the night, a brutal, ear-splitting eruption that sent splinters flying off the porch beams. The lanterns shattered, plunging everything into a smoke-drenched darkness. Asha gasped and ducked behind a water trough. Mia grabbed Elliot's arm, fear wide in her eyes. "They're going to burn us out," Elliot muttered, breath sharp. "Get to the storage cellar, now." They sprinted low to the ground, dodging bullets as they darted behind the wagon. The air smelled of gunpowder and churned dirt. Above them, riders shouted orders, short, ruthless commands. "Take the girl. Kill the rancher. Burn everything you find." Asha flinched at every word. This wasn't just violence, it was extermination. Elliot dragged open the heavy storm door to the underground storage cellar. "Get in," he ordered. Mia climbed down first, pulling Asha with her. Elliot followed, slamming the door shut just as another round of gunfire ripped across the yard. Inside, the cellar was cramped, dimly lit by a single candle. Barrels of dried grain and sacks of flour filled the corners. The thick earth walls muffled some of the chaos above, but not enough. Every gunshot sounded like it was tearing through their bones. Asha pressed her hands to her ears. "They'll kill us," she whispered, voice trembling. "Not if I can help it," Elliot said, though fear crept into his own words. He positioned himself near the door, revolver ready. Above them, the attackers spread out, boots pounding the soil, torches igniting in the cold air. Smoke seeped through the cracks in the doorframe. Then came the scraping sound, metal against wood, a fuse being set. Mia's breath hitched. "Papa, they're planting dynamite." Elliot's heart slammed against his ribs. "Back, both of you, now." They scrambled behind the grain barrels as the ground vibrated. Dust sifted from the ceiling. Asha clutched Elliot's sleeve, terrified. He wrapped an arm around her instinctively, shielding both her and Mia as the cellar door bulged inward, wood groaning under the force. Asha buried her face against his chest. Mia gripped his coat with white knuckles. This was it. The moment death pressed its cold hand against them. Boom! The explosion shook the entire hillside. A deep, violent roar that rattled the barrels and sent dirt cascading from the ceiling. The cellar door held, but barely. Flames flickered in the cracks above them, painting the narrow space with shuddering red light. Asha sobbed quietly. Mia trembled against her father. Elliot tightened his hold, jaw clenched, breath ragged. "We're not dying down here," he whispered fiercely. "Not tonight." Outside, shouting erupted, panic shouting. Elliot lifted his head. That wasn't the voice of mercenaries. Gunfire erupted again, but this time from a different direction. Sharps, disciplined shots. Commands barked with authority. "The marshals," Elliot breathed. "Damn it, that's them." Through the floorboards came the unmistakable roar of horses charging into the fray. A familiar voice cut through the chaos. Loud, commanding, relentless. "Drop your weapons, in the name of the law." Elliot's old colleague, a man he never thought he'd see again. The mercenaries broke formation. Gunfire stuttered. Panic rippled. Then hoofbeats retreating. The masked riders fled into the night, leaving smoke, chaos, and scorched earth behind. When the cellar door was finally pulled open, cold air rushed in, and torchlight revealed the silhouettes of marshals standing guard over the smoking yard. Asha looked around, shaken. Elliot stood slowly, helping Mia to her feet. His face was dark with soot, jaw set in a grim line. This wasn't an isolated attack. This wasn't intimidation. This was war, and Western Iron had just declared it. The courthouse of Dry Ridge looked even older in the gray morning light. Its warped wooden boards bowed from decades of sun, rain, and frontier tempers. But on this day, the tired old building felt different, alive, buzzing, like it knew justice had finally wandered back into town after being gone too long. Word of the attack on Warren Ranch had spread fast. So had the whispers about the leather-bound notebook Elliot Warren now carried in his hand. The infamous ledger of Vance, director of Western Iron. The benches filled early. Ranchers, miners, traders, and a handful of Apache elders sat shoulder to shoulder, the air thick with dust and anticipation. Asha walked beside Elliot, her steps quiet but steady. She wore no shackles today, no deputy held her arm. Instead, she walked free, chin lifted, wrapped in a simple woven shawl gifted by her people. Mia trailed slightly behind them, clutching a stack of documents, her sharp gaze alert for any hint of trouble. Elliot pushed open the courtroom doors and the room fell into a hush. The judge eyed him from the bench, an old man with wind-creased features and eyes that had seen far too many lies in his career. "Mr. Warren," he said slowly, "I assume you have brought evidence the court was not previously given access to." Elliot stepped forward. "Yes, Your Honor. And once you hear it, things won't ever be the same." He placed the notebook on the table. The thud echoed through the room like a dropped anvil. The prosecutor visibly paled. Elliot opened the ledger with deliberate calm, flipping to the first page. "This," he began, voice steady and unyielding, "is Mr. Vance's personal account of Western Iron's operations, written in his own hand." He lifted a sheet of paper, one bearing a detailed sketch. "Here is the map of illegal mining tunnels dug under Apache land. Tunnels his company denied existed." Murmurs broke through the room. One of the Apache elders closed his eyes in grief and fury. Elliot continued, turning the page. "And here, we have the lists of payments made to law officers. Sheriff Hodges received 12 of them. The deputy received 6. Payments disguised as security expenses." Gasps erupted. The judge rapped his gavel sharply. Elliot didn't pause. He held up another document, this one marked with sequential numbers and coded instructions. "These are written orders to Western Iron employees and hired men. Orders to intimidate ranchers, sabotage water sources, and spread fear in Dry Ridge so the town would support the seizure of Apache land." He turned to the prosecutor. "And here are instructions for fabricating evidence against Asha. Every false deposition, every forged signature, all listed, time-stamped, and assigned to employees who never thought this notebook would see daylight." The prosecutor sank lower in his chair. Elliot placed the final pages on the table. Vance's signature stamped across every one. "Your Honor, this was never a theft, never a crime committed by Miss Asha. This was a land grab, a quiet war built on lies, bribery, and greed. A corporation trying to erase a people to claim what was not theirs." The judge stared at the papers long and hard, his weathered hands resting heavily on the bench. The weight of years and guilt seemed to settle on him. Then he turned his gaze to Asha. "Miss Asha," he said, voice solemn and sincere, "you are free, completely and unconditionally free." Asha let out a breath she had been holding for weeks, a fragile, trembling exhale that carried both relief and heartbreak. Mia grinned, her eyes shining with triumph. The crowd broke into scattered applause. The Apache elders bowed their heads in gratitude. Even a few hardened ranchers wiped their eyes. The judge wasn't finished. "And as for Western Iron Company," he said, voice ringing with frontier steel, "this court will be issuing warrants for the arrest of Director Vance and all involved parties. Their operations will be suspended pending federal review." It felt unreal, like watching a giant fall in slow motion. Western Iron, untouchable for so long, was shattered in a single morning. Asha's freedom, her people's land, the valley's safety, all restored in the span of an hour. Elliot stood still as the room erupted, his expression caught between disbelief and quiet, bone-deep vindication. He had dreamed of clearing his name once, but never believed it would happen. Yet when the judge turned to him, something in the old man's gaze softened. "Mr. Warren," he said, "it appears justice finally found its way back to you." A silence fell around Elliot, warm, reverent. For the first time in 15 years, his shoulders eased. The scars of his past didn't disappear, but they no longer chained him. The town looked at him not with suspicion or pity, but with respect. The respect he'd once earned and thought forever lost. He nodded once, a quiet, grateful gesture. Beside him, Asha touched his arm lightly. "My people live because of you," she whispered. "No," Elliot murmured, eyes softening. "They live because you never bowed." But inside, he knew the truth. Justice wasn't done yet. Western Iron would strike again, and the war was only beginning. But for now, the truth had won. Late that afternoon, when the sun had dipped low enough to stain the sky in warm copper, Elliot Warren stood on the porch of his ranch, arms resting loosely against the railing. The place felt different now, quieter, lighter, as if the dust itself had finally settled after years of turmoil. The trial had ended only hours earlier, yet the weight of it still clung to him like smoke. Western Iron had crumbled under the truth. Asha had walked free, and the crowd in Dry Ridge couldn't quite decide whether to cheer or hang their heads in shame. Elliot didn't wait for applause. Justice wasn't a performance to him. It was a duty, one he had nearly lost his life, his reputation, and his sanity trying to serve. The sound of hoofbeats drifted up the dirt lane, soft, unhurried, familiar. He didn't turn right away. Something in his chest already knew who it was. Asha slowed her painted pony before the gate, the wind tugging gently at the dark braids that brushed her shoulders. She looked smaller than she had in court, without the fire and steel she had carried like armor. Now she looked almost fragile, but not weak, never weak. Just honest, stripped of the need to defend herself against a world that had nearly swallowed her whole. She dismounted, hesitated, then walked toward him across the yard. Every step seemed weighted with things she hadn't yet found the courage to say. Elliot stepped down from the porch. The earth between them hummed with quiet tension, uncertain but warm, like the moment before a summer storm breaks. Asha stopped a few feet away, fingers tightening around the reins before she let them drop. Her voice, usually sharp and sure, softened into something almost trembling. "You protected me," she said, eyes fixed on the ground, "when no one else dared to." The words struck him harder than any bullet ever had. He swallowed, watching her hands. Small, steady, calloused by a life far rougher than most folks would ever understand. "Asha," he murmured gently, "you shouldn't have had to face any of that alone." She lifted her gaze then, and in her eyes, deep, solemn, shining, Elliot saw something he hadn't let himself believe existed anymore. Trust. Not the cautious kind reserved for strangers or allies of convenience, but the quiet, daring sort born from shared danger and truth earned the hard way. "No one deserves to stand alone in a world like this," he added. The wind curled her hair against her cheeks. She took a small step closer. "You say that like you know the feeling," she replied, her voice carrying a tender curiosity. He chuckled, low and weary. "I know it better than I care to admit." She studied him with that intuitive Apache stillness, observant, perceptive, almost spiritual. She seemed to read the pieces of his broken past like they were laid out on the dirt between them. The years of exile, the humiliation, the ruined career, the bitterness he'd tried and failed to bury. "You carried your burden alone for a long time," she whispered. "Longer than was good for me," he answered. Another moment passed in silence, long and fragile. The ranch creaked in the evening breeze and the horizon glowed gold as if the sky itself had been waiting for this scene. Asha reached for his hand, slowly, cautiously, as though touching something sacred. Her fingers brushed his, warm and trembling. He froze, breath catching like a man who'd forgotten how to feel anything but duty and loss. "You didn't just save my life," she said. "You gave it back to me." Her thumb grazed the scar across his palm, the same hand he'd used to shield her during the gunfight in the dark. The memory hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Elliot closed his fingers around hers, firm but gentle. "Asha, you gave something back to me too." She tilted her head. "What did I give you?" "Hope," he answered quietly. "The kind a man doesn't expect to find twice in one lifetime." A blush warmed her cheeks, visible even in the dimming light. She didn't look away. Their hands remained joined while the last stretch of sun faded behind the hills. Two people from two worlds, one shaped by frontier law and lonely fences, the other by ancient earth and a tribe's enduring strength, standing together in a rare sacred pause where possibilities began to root. For the first time since he'd cleared his name, Elliot didn't feel the empty ache of the years he'd lost. And for the first time since the night she was taken in chains, Asha allowed herself to imagine a future not shaped by fear, but by choice. The wind whispered across the field, quiet, steady, promising. Something had begun, something neither courthouse verdicts nor hostile worlds could erase. The winter snows melted early that year, leaving the plains around Dry Ridge brushed in soft spring gold. Elliot Warren rode into town at dawn, the brim of his weathered hat catching the pale sunlight. Men nodded to him. Women lifted their chins in quiet respect. Children paused their play to watch him pass. Not long ago, this town had looked at him with suspicion, an ex-lawman disgraced by a lie. But the courtroom storm was over. Truth had clawed its way into daylight, and Elliot, with a steadiness that felt carved from bedrock, was building something new from the ashes of his old life. His first act was reopening the town's law council, an institution that had once stood tall before corruption seeped into its beams. He cleaned out the office himself, sweeping away dust, old files, and the memory of the marshal who had betrayed him. When the doors opened again, people came, ranchers, widows, immigrants, and drifters. Folks who had never been listened to by anyone in authority. And Elliot listened, patiently, intently. He took every case, big or small, fighting for the timid, the poor, the overlooked. No longer an outcast, he had become something rarer, a steady man in an unsteady land. Mia, sharp-minded, fiery-hearted Mia, sat beside him at the council table most afternoons, learning how to read legal notices, how to mark land boundaries, how to argue a case until even stubborn cattlemen gave in. She grew into her confidence the way the prairie grew into spring, quiet but unstoppable. Elliot never said it aloud, but he was proud of her in a way that tugged deep at his chest. And then there was Asha. She returned to her people for a time after the trial, carrying the news that Western Iron's scheme had fallen apart. But she did not stay away long. The girl who once walked in chains now walked with purpose, her posture sure, her gaze fearless. Dry Ridge saw something in her they had never expected to see in an Apache woman: leadership. Asha became the bridge no one knew they needed, translating, negotiating, soothing old wounds that had been festering for generations. She convinced ranchers to respect the boundaries of tribal hunting trails. She helped her elders understand why settlers feared raids that never came. She negotiated water rights with a calm, articulate grace that left even the most stubborn homesteaders blinking in disbelief. One evening, as the sun bled crimson across the hills, she rode up to Elliot's ranch. Not with the uncertainty of the woman seeking refuge months before, but with a kind of serene confidence. "This land," she said quietly, gazing out over the open fields, "is the place where my life changed." Elliot looked at her, not just her strength or her beauty, but the courage she carried like a second heartbeat. "You're welcome here as long as you want to be," he said. She turned to him, eyes luminous. "I'm not leaving. My tribe has found peace, and her voice softened. "I found a man who stands for what is right, even when he stands alone." He swallowed, emotion tightening his throat. The wind brushed past them, carrying the scent of sage and warm earth. They didn't need grand declarations. Out here, spoken words were less important than the hard choices a person made, the backbone they showed when the land grew cruel. Asha reached for his hand. He took it without hesitation. Together, they watched twilight settle over the ranch, this unlikely home they were beginning to build, not through blood or marriage, but through shared battle, restored trust, and a tender hope neither of them had dared to dream of. In the wild country of the frontier, where dust storms erased footprints, where the strong survived and the desperate learned to fight, folks said only force could change a land. But they were wrong. Sometimes all it took was a rancher willing to stand against the powerful, and an Apache girl brave enough to believe in him. Two souls steady in their conviction, reshaping a corner of the West simply by refusing to bow. And in that refusal, in their stubborn, steadfast courage, the land finally began to heal.